Hi, I'm Sarah from The Upcoming. Such a pleasure to be able to speak to you today. Easy question first. Maybe you could just start with an introduction to this amazing film, Lakelands. What can people expect when they watch it?
Yeah, of course. So the film Lakelands, it's about a young Gaelic footballer who's his identity is very much wrapped up in playing of the sport. And he suffers a attack on a night out and he finds himself unable to play. And he kind of has a search for identity then, and it kind of is an exploration of rural Ireland, modern youth culture there, and kind of a lot of the issues that affect young people. So we kind of used it as a jumping off point to explore all those issues, I suppose.
Mm. And what was the sort of initial inspiration? Was it something that either of you had, experienced, or a life that you knew, or why did you want to tell this story on the big screen?
Yeah, I suppose for us, we obviously grew up playing Gaelic football. Myself and Rob kind of met at underage training years and years ago. Rob saw sense at 18 and left and went off to live his life. And I stayed playing for about 12 years and only very, very recently retired. So it was definitely a world that we knew from the inside. But it's also such a huge part of Irish culture that had never really been depicted. The culture around the sport had never really been depicted, in particular at grassroots level. So I suppose for us, we just seen it as a massive opportunity to portray a world that we knew extremely well, and a world that a huge amount of Irish people know extremely well. And we were also attracted by the universality of it as well, I suppose. There's a lot of common ground between, small town Gaelic football and high school football and college football in America. And so many other countries have comparable sporting cultures. So I suppose there was just mostly opportunity. But then, as well as that, there was opportunity, and then that met the practicality of having access to a football team, having access to a small town, and being able to portray that world with complete confidence. So it was a mixture of opportunity and the practicality of being able to pull it off.
And exactly what you said there, something that really struck me about it is that it's so specific to a time, to a place, but there are so many universal themes in it. And also, from the outside, you could say it's quite kind of a simple story, very rooted in kind of everyday experience. But it's also so layered and rich in terms of kind of the different emotions that are being conveyed and the themes that kind of arise from it. So was that really important to you to also just kind of capture, what is it like to live and the life of that main character? And it feels very, very authentic. And how did you kind of pull that off on screen?
Yeah, that was like a major motivation for us. I suppose because we were so close to it, it kind of worked well for us. I mean, the film shot in our hometown. The farming scenes, that's Paddy's dad's farm, his house, and like local pubs, the local football team. So it was all a bit strange nearly seeing filming, the scenes we'd nearly almost lived, years earlier on or a bit younger. So I think that really helped to kind of enrichen the whole process. And, a lot of the background characters, supporting characters, they would have been people from the community. So we were really eager to kind of incorporate as much of that as possible, kind of give it just that really lived in feel, and kind of make it kind of just feel as close to reality as possible.
And if you can say a bit about, obviously saying about the supporting cast, but, your main cast, I mean, this central performance is absolutely incredible. And particularly the fact that it's kind of this combination of course, having to have this sort of very macho, very kind of stereotypically masculine exterior, but there's just so much going on underneath, which is not an easy thing to achieve. So how did you cast your main character, and then even people like Danielle, who's kind of playing off against him as well?
Yeah, I suppose when it came to cast and Cian, we knew that we were going to be throwing everything and anything at this character, and they were going to have to convey the full kind of spectrum of emotion. And we'd been very aware of Éanna's work for a number of years leading up to Lakelands, and we were big fans of his. And I suppose when it came to the casting, like there was only one man for the job, and we were extremely confident that he would be able to pull it off. And then once we began that kind of kind of process with him. Like, he just brought so much of himself and his experience to that part. And similarly with Danny, again, we were, big fans of her work for a number of years leading up to Lakelands. And when we got the two of them in a room, it became this extremely collaborative process. And, for us, the script is always 2D, and then it becomes 3D once you start working with the actors and you start, building out these characters' backstories, and so much of the vulnerability that we hope the audience sees on screen, that came to pass during that collaborative process with them, because they poured so much of their heart and soul into both characters. And then I think the real driving force through the film is their chemistry, and that's something that you can't plan for, you can only hope for. And when we got the two of them in a room, from the first couple of minutes, myself and Rob just looked at each other and we're like, we're onto a bit of a winner here, because, there was just sparks flying and they just had this incredible chemistry. And so much of this process is completely dependent on the cast and, their talent bringing it to life. Like, ultimately, they're the ones that are in front of the screen. They're the ones completely vulnerable, completely exposed, and they just did such an exceptional job, and they just threw themselves completely into Granard culture, and they became like, part of the furniture down here for the few weeks, and everyone just fell in love with them. And I think that type of environment allowed them to, I suppose, give or portray that really kind of vulnerable part of themselves. And I think that was just down to just that really kind of collaborative and supportive environment that was created through the cast, the crew, the community. It was a number of different factors for sure, but ultimately it was their immense talent that carried it across the line.
And in terms of kind of, being on the shoot and, some of the challenges and highlights along the way, I mean, sometimes realism is actually one of the hardest things to pull off in sort of a backward way, going from the football pitch, the farm, but then of course also maybe some of those really emotional scenes, and making sure you capture all the nuance. So what might have been some of the hardest bits, but also the highlights along the way?
Yeah, like I think what you mentioned there, like kind of, I think our restrictions were actually benefits in a way, because we were a small budget production with a tight timeline, and we were working with a relatively small crew. But that can be a challenge in itself, because you're always stuck for time, and we shot in 17 days, so that's like you're just running from scene to scene. But I think it was a real benefit for us in terms then of the scenes can be a lot more intimate when you have that kind of smaller crew. And I think it's not as cluttered, with people everywhere rushing everywhere. I think it probably allowed the actors to feel a little bit like freer at that point, because we all kind of knew each other. We were all living in close proximity to one another, in each other's pockets for weeks. And I think it just felt natural doing those scenes. It didn't feel pressurized when we were doing those kind of heavily emotional scenes, because I think we were all kind of close. We were all a big gang at that point. So I think, yeah, it was simultaneously, it could be a challenge having the smaller crew, but I think it did afford it that kind of intimacy and kind of getting in close into nearly a documentary feel at times, which I think really benefited the film.
Some of the farm stuff looked like it was actually just happening. Was that right? Like there was like a camping board and everything.
It was indeed.
It was indeed. One moment in particular, I suppose we were shooting at the same time as calving season, and it was always in our heads, wouldn't it be amazing if we, were able to capture that on screen? And we kind of left a bit of a gap in the script just on the off chance, but we didn't want to tempt fate too much, so we never bothered telling Aina that it was a possibility, because then we knew it would never happen. So then the first day we were shooting on the farm, my dad came rushing in and was like, "There's a cow about to calve, there's a cow about to calve." And me and Rob looked at each other. We knew what that meant. I don't think Aina knew what that meant, and the camera team didn't know what that meant. But we just grabbed Aina. Well, my dad grabbed Aina by the scruff of the neck, really, and we just grabbed the camera and threw them into this kind of dark shed, and gave Aina a 45-second tutorial on how to calve a cow, and he did it exceptionally well. We were lucky it was an easy calving bull, so there wasn't a lot of complications. But yeah, like that was a magical moment, because I think the whole the whole set, the whole crew was just like, wow, this is like just amazing, just to be able to capture that. Like I've seen that like numerous times, but to be able to capture it and to be able to feel the energy of everyone who were seeing it for the first time, and it was an incredible moment. But yeah, testament to how good an actor Ian is that he was able to calve a cow with about a minute long tutorial on how to do it.
In terms of kind of the themes that come out of the film, I mean, what's interesting, like we said at the beginning, you know, like a fairly simple narrative, but it does feel like there's kind of this tension, or this feeling that you're so gripped by what's going to happen next, and kind of the lurking threat or the elephant in the room that, you know, you don't know, you know, how far it's going to go before he realizes he needs to take a step back. But it's also not just his journey, because you're thinking, okay, well, why doesn't he sort of react or take control of his life? But it's also everyone around him. So that's the kind of the problem, I guess, when we talk about toxic masculinity. Even though everyone else can sense something's up, also no one else is really challenging on it, whether it's his father or whether it's the coach or whether it's the football team. So, you know, I guess, would you say in some ways the film is sort of quietly critical of that environment that men can be in? So it's not something that's always just an individual challenge, but it's also something that's sort of embedded there in the sense in society. What kind of things did you want to kind of draw out with the film?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Like, I think we wanted to kind of show an overview of the whole kind of the scale of it, and particularly like there is a huge amount of the harmful kind of areas, I suppose, and really shine a light on those ones. How having a shell up, you know, can really, it can be damaging. You know, you can really let yourself just not expose yourself to the emotions you should be, and be way too guarded. So we were really eager to just bring that to as far as we could, because we have obviously seen it a lot in real life. I suppose we also wanted to then balance it with some of the positives of stuff that's there, but he's not opening his eyes fully to. Like his friend Sparky's kind of reaching out to him a little bit, but he's too guarded to even accept that. And he's too guarded to accept a lot of the little tells around the place. So I suppose we wanted to just kind of shine a light on it and chip away at it a little bit, and kind of, I suppose, keep it as close to reality as we could, into how gradual a process it can be for someone who's been ingrained in these kind of rituals and routines since they were kids, and just show what that process might be like to actually chip it away and get into being in a more open space.
And I guess also, despite on the one side it feeling like it is shining a bit of a spotlight, and there is some kind of criticism there, there's also a lot of optimism, because, you know, even as Danielle's character is saying to him, you know, think of it as a second chance. And then there are always those chances. And, you know, there is a feeling of hope that seeps through the film. So is that something that you wanted to kind of put in balance?
Yeah, for sure. I suppose when we sat down to write it, we wanted to write something that ultimately ended on a hopeful note. You know, coming from a very small county, you know, a very small town, you know, the outward perception can often be kind of negative, or maybe there's no perception at all. And I think we wanted to portray this world and portray the people from the inside, and the people that live where we live are the most positive, hopeful people we know, you know. And we didn't want to, we thought that if we didn't end on that hopeful note, and if we didn't have that hopeful thread through the film, we'd be doing our hometown a disservice, you know. So I think that was definitely front of mind. But then once we started kind of writing the characters, and especially when we were actually just working with Danny and Aina, they're just such positive people, and they can't help but bleed that into their portrayal of both characters. So it was kind of a natural conclusion, I suppose, from that process. But it was definitely front of mind starting out. But I think, as I said, yeah, just the more we worked with them, the more we realized that this was ultimately going to have a hopeful ending, and yeah, a hopeful thread throughout it.
In terms of what people, you know, might take away, or the impact of a film like this might be, I mean, of course, it's just like a wonderful film to be immersed in and to experience. But, you know, do you hope that in a way films like this, or opening up the conversations and those portrayals of masculinity in films, can kind of open up conversations? I mean, I was thinking also about Normal People. There was kind of some themes which I thought were a little bit reminiscent of that, and how it did get people talking. Seeing a man break down and cry, or show his feelings, or have to kind of feel that conflict perhaps with his groups of friends, or what's expected of him, and question that, and maybe not just always go along with what's put in front of him. And in the past, we haven't seen enough of that on screen, maybe. So do you think things hopefully can open up in the future?
Yeah, for sure. Like, I think that was one of our big ambitions with the film, that it would kind of stoke those kind of conversations. And I think, yeah, as you mentioned with Normal People there, like, I think that resonated in our country and abroad, like, as well, because it was just a very realistic depiction of kind of youth life. And I guess a lot of time growing up, we didn't really feel seen in some of the work that was created, and it wasn't kind of maybe dealing with some of these kind of issues. So it's definitely something we're hoping to kind of delve into in this film, and hopefully, a lot of these issues are starved of oxygen here. They're not really talked about. They're kind of just there in the background, and there's a lot of statistics and stuff about them, and no one really gets into what the stories behind all of this. So I guess that was a big thing for us to go into, and to hopefully, open it up to a wider discussion.
Yeah, or sometimes it can feel like there's maybe two tracks to these things. Like, it can feel like there's a lot of progress in some, I don't know, when you're thinking sort of like reading The Guardian, living in London, and things like that, and people are going teetotal and, living different lives. And it's like, well, of course, actually, that's not everywhere. And, if I go back to my hometown, things aren't running on the same track, and actually things don't change as much as you think. And the way, like, same as England, perhaps in Ireland, how drinking culture is just so embedded in everything that we do, and no one really questions that. So it's also kind of showing that there's that contrast, that not everywhere's moving at the same pace.
For sure, it's really interesting, actually, the comments, some of the discussions we have around drinking culture, particularly when we're screening it abroad, because it's so embedded in kind of our hometown and in Ireland in general. Like, it's kind of a constant there. So it's it's definitely interesting seeing it through other people's eyes, and it's just taken for granted here, and it probably needs to be looked at in a more critical light as well.
I think I'm a few step on my time, but just quickly, finally, what does it mean for you to see the film? I think it was at Glasgow, and now getting another release here in England, and what you're going to be working on next.
I suppose just to get in front of an international audience, firstly, is like, it's just a dream come true. We made it in such a grassroots way. We made it with our kind of community, our friends. So like, to get it out there to a national audience firstly, and then an international audience, and to have people from the UK reacting positively is just amazing. And we're definitely pinching ourselves, and it's given us a lot of confidence to, I suppose, double down on where we're from, and maybe with our next project, then we're keen to explore Midlands culture further, and just everything you were saying there about the culture of escapism through alcohol and drugs. I think that's something that we're really keen to do a deeper dive into on our next project. It's called Bonfires, so we're in development on that at the moment, but it's a real kind of exploration of that aspect of the culture, and maybe a little less sports and a little more
All right, perfect. Well, thank you so much for sharing all that with me, and I can't wait for everyone else to see Lakelands. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much, Sarah. Lovely chatting.
Cheers. Thank you. Bye.